Let, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. For the past 2 Sundays, I've called your attention to the centrality of the idea of the nerve center of consent, which is in each one of us, and it is the clue to the way in which we consciously work out our destiny and achieve some measure of fulfillment in living. We have a resource upon which we draw, a resource that is as wide as life and as profound as is the plunging spirit of man. The outer and the inner. I'd like to focus our thinking about that this morning. If I may look at the words of the psalmist for just a moment to get a setting. The words, let the words of our mouth, the words refer in my thinking to all of the outward expressions of the life, all of the activities, all of the externals. And of course the meditation in my thought refers to the inner, to the nerve center of consent, to that fluid area of purpose that provides the power for focusing of the spirit. We live very externally. For the most part, we tend to, because life seems to demand that of us. I think one of the reasons why we enjoy going to the country is the fact that we, in the country, occasionally we encounter people who have been sufficiently unhurried to salt down a few of their observations and let them ripen. And I think that's why people who live in the country are always glad when summer's over and the city people go back home. Because the outer life, the inner life, due primarily to the influence, I think, of Greek thought on Western culture and civilization, and particularly upon Christianity. We make a sharp distinction between the outer and the inner. We assume, for instance, that the spiritually minded individual confines himself exclusively to the inner. And we assume that the so-called practically minded man, the man of business, the man who works with his hands, the toiler, the two aren't the same necessarily, is a man who deals with the things that are external, that he's not supposed to be thoughtful. He handles the traffic. So we set up a separate category for these two human beings. And if the man who is supposed to give his thought and time to things spiritual spills over into this other area, we say that he should stick to his knitting. And if the man who is supposed to give all of his time to the traffic moves over into the other area, we say that something is wrong with him. Perhaps instead of going to church, he needs to go to a psychiatrist. Something's wrong with him. This dichotomy is so clear. We see it even in our worship. We make a very radical distinction between two kind of gods. I've mentioned this to you many times because it seems to me to be a very persistent aspect of our culture. The God of religion on the one hand, the God of the sanctuary, the God of the cloister, the God of the dim light, the soft treading step, the God of the holy place, the God of piety, the God of the extremities of life, and then the God of life over here, the God of the marketplace, the God who stays outside. And so persistent is this dichotomy in our thinking and feeling that we tend to split our allegiance right down the center. And we say, for instance, that the God of life is at a disadvantage in the place where the God of religion holds forth. When the God of life comes into the place where the God of religion dwells, the God of life is spanked. When the God of religion moves out into the traffic of the world, he's at a disadvantage. So we say about a religious insight that is trying to be implemented in terms of the context in which men live and breathe and suffer, struggle, hate and love. We say that any of those impulses, those insights that we are trying to validate in that kind of context are impractical. That's the way this dichotomy operates. So that the outer and the inner are separate in our thinking. And what the psalmist says is that let the outer and the inner both be acceptable in thy sight, because they should be one and the same. Tremendous, isn't it? Now, there are attitudes that we take toward living which seem to me to invalidate this sense of integration which may be summarized in terms of the free and easy flowing between the outer and the inner, free and easy access between these two, interaction this way. And one of those attitudes is one which insists that we should not recognize that there is a relationship between these two things. Think back over this week in your own life. Just this week. How many things have you done which seem to you to be expedient, necessary, but about which you had deep within yourself the profoundest kind of inner reservation. Just think about it. So that you found yourself functioning, developing a behavior pattern, or deepening a behavior pattern, activities, agreements, yesing or knowing, and you said to yourself, what I'm doing is not remotely connected with my own inner nerve center of consent. One of the things that we forget is that ordinarily we tend to believe that if a thing is at the nerve center of our consent, if it is something to which deep within us we subscribe as being true value for us, that if we can hold that thing at dead center in all of our functioning, we will finally arrive at a place that this thing will be the ground of our motivation, the very core of our motivation. And when it becomes the core of our motivation, then more and more the behavior patterns of our lives are reorganized around that new center of integration. Now that's true, that's sound, that is valid. But there's another aspect here to which I would call your attention, and that is that there is also the same kind of persistent relationship between the repetition of the outer pattern of life and the way in which that outer pattern of life finally redefines for us the nerve center of consent. Do you see what I'm saying? I feel that you do a little bit, but let me... We understand the first principle, that if you want to change your person, all you need to do is get this central thing. We may say the will or whatever it is. We need not use these extra words, but this intent, get his intent focused, and when that is is thoroughly focused, then that intent begins to provide a new center around which his behavior takes its accent and turn. Now, I'm saying that is true, but the other thing is true also, that I can act in a certain way with such persistency over a time interval of such duration that finally the pattern of my behavior becomes the new nerve center of consent. So that those of us who are concerned about changing our lives or changing the society, about trying to make a decent human being of ourselves or a decent social order, must see clearly the flowing between the outer and the inner. It is not only true then that the inner constantly and persistently informs the outer so as to redefine the meaning of the outer, but it is also true that the outer can persistently and consistently inform the inner. As Milton makes the devil say in Paradise Lost, I look before me, there's hell. I look behind me, there's hell. I look to the right, there's hell. To the left, there's hell. Behold, I myself am hell. The outer, inner. Now, therefore, in an effort to develop the inner, that it may become robust, we must not cut it off from the outer by the delusion that we can cut it off from the outer. And we can't do it. I remember the first year that Doug Steer started teaching philosophy at Haverford as Rufus Jones' successor. I attended all of his classes in philosophy. And 2 or 3 students, other students, and I had a little game that we played. You know how you make 4 lines, and then run a line through it, making 5 when you're tallying things. Well, Doug had a phrase that he used. The phrase was, so to speak. And I suppose those of you who've been listening to me for 8 or 9 years know that I have a few phrases that are like that. But every other sentence, Doug would say, so to speak, so to speak, so to speak. Gosh. So one evening at dinner, 2 of us showed him our tally marks. And, they were way up, a fabulous number. And he was shocked. He had no idea that he said, so to speak, over and over and over and over again. And then, the next day, in class, he was working away on the critique of pure reason, just having a wonderful time, and out it came. He got as far as so too, and then he froze. He backed up again, and for an hour, 55 minutes of class lecture, it was the most torturous experience I've ever seen a human being go through, trying to relate, you see, the inner and the outer. He became aware of a whole pattern that had not become a part of the nerve center of his consent, but was effective, that lived on the periphery. But in his effort to become a whole human being, he had to relate this inner and outer. And he limped for days until finally, when he said, so to speak, he meant to say it. Now that's what I mean. Now we can develop attitudes that ignore this relationship, and when we do, we find ourselves living as we think, constantly in two separate worlds. That I, in my heart, in my private spirit, in my own personal spiritual intimacies, I am this way. And then, in the pattern of my living, in my functioning, I'm this way. And the tragedy is that one of the iniquities of our society is that it presupposes that we are to function that way. Over and over again. We find ourselves with our behavior patterns obeying laws. Which deep within us, at the center, the vital center of us, we denounce, we deny. Can you see what such a problem is? When you apply it in various kinds of social situations? Suppose you lived in a part of the world in which the normal thing for people to do was going along a certain line, acting a certain way, going certain places. I remember when one night at Beswara Junction in central India, we were going up to Calcutta. Two young Indian friends were traveling with us, and because the trains carried no sleeping accommodations, the junction provided rooms upstairs over the station lobby. And for 25 cents or some small amount, you could get a bed for 2 hours or 3 hours, and then a guard would awaken you in time for you to get your train. You just dress and go downstairs and get your train. And we went upstairs, our party, with these two young Indian friends, and when we came up in this great place, we saw on one side a huge sign which said Europeans only, and another sign which said Indians only. Well, we were regarded in India as Europeans, so we could not go over on the side where the Indians were, where our friends were going, and our friends couldn't go on the side where we were. So we went downstairs and sat up the rest of the night. But now suppose you wanted a night's sleep, and that was the law. What do you do? What do you do? The outer, the inner. An attitude which says that there is a desert and a sea between these two is an attitude that is against life and for death, whether in the individual or society. Now, there's one other attitude against this background of the free and easy access. Remember, that's the point. The free and easy access between the inner and the outer. The words of my mouth, the outer. The meditation of my heart, the inner. Both as one, acceptable in the sight of God. That is the insistence, you see. Now, when I take an attitude of withdrawal, when I take an attitude of withdrawal from the outer, or, I didn't say and, or an attitude of withdrawal from the inner, I defeat both. Now, let's look at that just a minute. The principle of alternation is what I'm talking about. The first American thinker to introduce the concept of alternation in this whole matter of the flowing between the inner and the outer was Hawking in his tremendous volume on, well, I don't remember the title, but it's a good book. And then you remember that in this big work of Toynbee's, there is a tremendous case made for this same principle. But everybody knows about the principle of withdrawing and participation, the principle of picking up and putting down, the principle of walking and resting. Now, if I decide that I shall devote all of my energies to withdrawing, then withdrawing becomes the source of my arrogance and my pride. And out of the emptiness of my own inner self, I cry to God, God, I thank thee that I'm not as other men. I don't get my hands dirty. I keep my skirts clean. I do not expose myself. Well, there's something in us to which that appeals tremendously. Don't you feel sometimes if you could just shake everything off, just go to your little mountain hideout and just stay there? It's some private arrangement so you can get some food and some water But if you could just get away and stay away, that becomes the source of arrogance. And religious-minded men through all the ages and every culture and every kind of religion that's ethical in character have pointed out this great danger, that one of the major sources of pride in the human spirit is the delusion that it can withdraw and enjoy God forever and ever and ever. But how can I be happy in heaven if my brother is in hell? How can I? Can't do it. Now, the other source, you see, of pride and arrogance is just the reverse. That I have no time for the luxury of withdrawal, of the little retreat, of taking time out. Things must be done. Action, 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 action. One of the reasons why these people say one of the reasons why the world is as it is now, there's so many people whose heads are in the clouds. And what we need is practical people. We are suffering from that right now. We say that one of the reasons why our whole government is disintegrated, I'm not preaching a sermon on politics, but one of the reasons why we say our government is disintegrated and so on, we have no businessmen running things. Businessmen, they're the practical people, they know how to do. And that becomes a source of pride and arrogance, because I begin to develop contempt for the retreater, for the person who withdraws, for the thinker. He's visionary. He doesn't know anything about the facts of life. Now, what I'm saying is, that I'm through now, practically, that it is not one or the other of these, but if we want to be whole human beings, we've got to breathe in and out, in and out, in and out. For when I withdraw, even for 15 minutes a day, I not only have a chance to restore the waste places of my own spirit, to recapture the lost radiance of my own commitment, see my own goals clarified, bring my own life more into focus, whether I'm a religious man or not, even in terms of straight humanistic considerations, it's valid. I think it's more than that, but even on that level, it's valid. But not only does that happen to me, but when I withdraw and center down in my own spirit. Now, this is what I believe, my friends. I believe that in that act, I become involved in the very ground of vitality in which it is possible for me to make contact with other human beings at a level that transcends all of the spoken, that I can never understand through the formal discursive processes of mind. And I think it is at that level that a great awareness, not only of the meaning of life in general, but the meaning and the dignity of human life. And then when I come out of that and go to work in my functioning, I am building my house, my world, by a blueprint that is eternal. And to know that that is possible, or even to dare to believe that that is possible and not try it, is to run the risk of missing out on perhaps the most tremendous thing in human life. And when we then the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart become acceptable to God because they are one and the same, and we are whole. And that's wonderful. Wonderful.